They didn't shout when they mocked my father. They didn't have to. The kind of people who think they own the room know how to cut you down quietly and make you thank them for it. I walked into that Manhattan party thinking I was protecting him by staying calm. By the time I walked out, I'd already lost more than I realized. If you want the full story and the moment the truth finally landed, subscribe now and stay with me. I checked my phone one last time before we went in. A missed call from my daughter about a school form. An email from work flagged for Monday. Nothing urgent. Life, as usual, stacked neatly enough to pretend I had control over it. My father adjusted the collar of his jacket beside me. He'd worn the same navy blazer to church, to funerals, to parent-teacher nights back when my kids were small. Clean, pressed, familiar. I asked if he was comfortable. He nodded and smiled the way he always did when he didn't want to be a burden. The invitation came from Lauren. She said it would be good for my work. A few connections, light conversation, nothing heavy. I believed her. I always did. Inside, voices overlapped in that practiced way people speak when they're networking without admitting it. Handshakes lingered a second too long. Names were repeated twice, sometimes 3 times, as if saying them enough could make them stick. I introduced my father to a couple near the bar. They smiled politely, eyes already drifting past him. Lauren found us 10 minutes later. "You made it," she said, air kissing my cheek. Then she turned to him. "And this must be your dad." My father extended his hand. She shook it lightly, fingers barely closing. "So what do you do, sir?" He hesitated. I could feel it before he spoke. "I'm retired now. Used to work in logistics." "Oh, logistics." She laughed softly, like the word itself amused her. Then she leaned closer to me. "I didn't realize you'd be bringing family." It wasn't loud. No one stopped talking. Music kept playing. But the space around us shifted. A few people looked over, curious in the way people get when they sense hierarchy being clarified. We moved toward a standing table with a small group. Conversation turned to investments, second homes, a charity auction happening later that night. My father stayed quiet. He always knew when to step back. Someone mentioned private schools. Another joked about real money and laughed before finishing the sentence. Lauren glanced at my father again. "You must find all this a bit much." "It's fine," he said. "I like listening." She smiled, thin and quick. "Of course, some people are more comfortable observing than participating." A man beside her chuckled. Another raised his glass. I felt my jaw tighten. Still, I said nothing. Old habits don't die easily. Keep the peace. Don't escalate. This isn't the place. Then the waiter came around with trays. Lauren took a drink, waved him off for my father. "These are probably not your thing," she said. "We'll get you something simpler." My father looked at me. Not angry, not embarrassed. Just checking, the way he used to when I was a kid, and he wanted to know if I needed help tying my shoes. I could have said something. Anything. A correction, a boundary. Instead, I nodded slightly, as if this made sense. The rest of the night blurred into fragments. People asked me questions and answered their own before I could finish. Lauren kept steering conversations away from my father, physically turning her back at one point. Someone joked about old-school work ethic and glanced in his direction. At some point, my father touched my arm. "I'll wait outside," he said quietly. "Get some air. We can go together." "No, finish what you came for." He didn't wait for my response, just walked toward the exit, shoulders steady, steps measured. I stayed another 5 minutes, maybe 10, long enough to shake a few more hands, long enough to realize I wasn't hearing anything anymore, just nodding at mouths moving. Outside, the night was cooler. Taxis slid past. People laughed on the sidewalk like nothing had happened. My father stood a few feet away, looking down the street. I stepped beside him. Neither of us spoke. After a moment, he adjusted his jacket again, same small motion as before, and started walking toward the corner. I followed, pulling my phone from my pocket, already thinking about the drive home, the form my daughter needed signed, the email waiting for Monday. The next morning didn't announce itself as different. Coffee brewed the same way. Traffic moved in slow obedience. My phone buzzed with the usual mix of work emails and family messages. Still, something had shifted, and I felt it before anyone said a word. At the office, Conversations paused when I walked by. Not abruptly, just a fraction too long. A project update that would normally come straight to me landed in my inbox through someone else. A meeting invite was rescheduled without explanation. Nothing concrete, just small adjustments that added up. By noon, I understood what was happening. Someone had talked, probably more than one person. Stories rarely travel alone. A colleague stopped me near the elevator. "Rough night yesterday, huh?" "It was a party." "Yeah, I heard." He didn't elaborate. Neither did I. The doors closed between us, and my reflection stared back, tie slightly crooked, eyes more tired than they had any right to be. Family was no better. My sister called in the afternoon, her tone careful. "Dad okay?" "He's fine." "You sure? Because Aunt May said..." "Said what?" A pause. Then, "Never mind. Just make sure he's okay." She hung up before I could ask more. I didn't need details. I knew how those conversations went. Someone reframed what happened, softened their own role, sharpened ours. Silence on my end made it easier. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. No laws were broken. No contracts violated. Let it pass. Focus on work. Focus on the kids. That had always been my strategy. Absorb the discomfort so everyone else could move on. But the body remembers what the mouth refuses to say. During a client call, my attention drifted. While reviewing numbers, I caught myself rereading the same line. When my daughter asked about dinner, I snapped without meaning to, apologized too quickly. She shrugged it off, but the look stayed with me. Late afternoon, I stepped out to grab a coffee I didn't need. The place was crowded, the lines slow. While waiting, I heard my name. "Hey, you were at that thing last night, right?" I turned. She stood a few steps back, holding a notebook and a cup, hair pulled up in a way that suggested she hadn't planned on staying long. We'd met once before, through a mutual friend. "Yeah. Mind if I join you?" We sat by the window. She didn't ease into it. "People are talking." I figured. Not kindly. A short silence followed. She watched my reaction, or lack of one. "You didn't do anything wrong," she added. "I didn't do anything at all." That's the part they're using. Her words landed heavier than she probably intended. I stirred my coffee, though it had already gone cold. "Sometimes letting things go is a choice," I said. "Sometimes it's an invitation." I looked up. She didn't sound angry, just certain. "They're filling in the gaps because you left them open," she continued. "And your father's paying for it, too." That stung more than I expected. I'd been protecting him by staying quiet, or so I told myself. "What would you have done?" I asked. "Me? I'd decide where my line is. Then I'd stop pretending it isn't there." She finished her coffee and stood. For what it's worth, silence convinces people you agree, or that you're weak, usually both. She left without waiting for a response. Back at the office, the rest of the day crawled. A meeting wrapped without my input. An email chain ended before I was looped in. None of it was dramatic enough to confront. All of it chipped away at something steady I'd relied on. That evening, I drove past my father's place and slowed, considering whether to stop. The lights were on. His car sat where it always did. He was fine. That's what I kept telling myself. At home, paperwork waited on the kitchen table. School forms, bills, ordinary things. I signed where needed, stacked the rest, and checked my phone again. No new messages. Plenty of unanswered ones. I set the phone face down and sat there longer than necessary, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, realizing that whatever I'd hoped would fade overnight was still very much in motion. The call came while I was cleaning out an old drawer in my father's apartment. He'd asked me to help sort through paperwork he no longer needed. Nothing heavy. Utility bills, warranty cards, things he'd kept long past their usefulness. My phone buzzed on the counter. "You don't know me," a man said when I answered. "But I was at that event." I waited. "The one in Manhattan, with your father." My hands stilled over a stack of folders. "Go on." Something about the way people were talking didn't sit right. I work in compliance. I hear half-truths for a living. He didn't rush. Neither did I. "Your father's name came up later," he continued. "Not in the room, after. And what people were saying didn't match the records." "What records?" "Public ones, old filings, logistics contracts from the early 2000s. Nothing hidden. I asked him to send what he had. He agreed, then hung up as if he'd already said too much. My father shuffled in from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. Who was that? Wrong number. He nodded and sat across from me, flipping through a newspaper. I stared at the email notification that had just come through. The documents were basic. Contracts, board listings, names I recognized from my childhood, tied to warehouses and shipping routes my father used to talk about at dinner. I'd never questioned how deep his involvement ran. He never bragged, never corrected anyone who assumed small. Later that afternoon, I reached out to someone I used to work with, an old mentor. The call went to voicemail. A follow-up text stayed unread. Another contact replied hours later with a polite deflection. Can't get involved. That phrase appeared twice more before the day ended. Access didn't disappear all at once. It narrowed. Replies shortened. Meetings filled up. A shared drive I'd used for years suddenly required approval. When I asked about it, the explanation came back vague. New protocol. The timing wasn't subtle. I stopped explaining myself, stopped correcting narratives, started paying attention instead. At home, after the kids were asleep, I opened my laptop and began saving everything. Emails, calendar invites, message threads. I forwarded copies to a private account. Screenshots went into labeled folders. Nothing dramatic, just methodical. A week later, I ran into Lauren outside a restaurant near my office. She smiled as if nothing had changed. You've been hard to reach. Busy. We should catch up, clear the air. About what? Her smile thinned. People are confused. About my father? About you, she said, and the choices you make, like bringing my dad to a party? Like not knowing when something isn't appropriate. I let the silence stretch. If there's an issue, it should be addressed directly. It is being addressed. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at me. Just not by you. She walked away before I could respond. That night, I pulled out a box I hadn't opened since my divorce. Old tax returns, settlement documents, notes from lawyers I'd stopped calling once everything was finalized. Tucked between them was a letter from my father, written years ago and never sent. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It wasn't long. Just an apology for not being more present when my marriage fell apart. A line about providing in ways that don't always show. A promise to step back if that's what I needed. I sat there longer than I planned, the paper resting on my knee. The next morning, a meeting invite I was supposed to lead was reassigned. No explanation. When I asked, the response came quick. Decision from above. I closed the email and opened my notes instead, adding another timestamp, another name. That evening, my father called. Everything okay at work? Yeah. You sound tired. Long week. He didn't press. He never did. After the call ended, I stood by the window, phone still in hand, watching the street fill with people heading home. The routines continued. The systems held. Somewhere inside them, something was shifting, and I was no longer certain I recognized the shape of it. The invitation landed mid-week, slipped into my calendar without comment. Same venue type, different host. Industry panel, open bar, cameras expected. Declining would have been noticed. Attending would be watched. I chose the latter and showed up early. Signed in, took a seat near the aisle. People filtered in with the usual small talk. Jackets draped over chairs, phones checked face down. I exchanged nods with a few familiar faces. No one lingered. That alone told me enough. Lauren arrived 10 minutes late and didn't look in my direction. She moved straight to the front, greeted the moderator, leaned in to whisper something. I watched the exchange without reacting, took notes on my phone the way I always did during public events. Habit can be useful cover. The panel started on schedule. Market trends, infrastructure funding, safe ground. Then, the questions opened to the floor. Lauren stood before anyone else could raise a hand. We've been talking a lot about transparency tonight, she said, smiling toward the audience, and accountability. I'm curious how the panel feels about leaders who blur personal and professional boundaries. A few heads turned, not toward her, toward me. For example, she continued, bringing family into spaces meant for business, without regard for optics or appropriateness. The room went quiet in that polite way people mistake for neutrality. The moderator cleared his throat. Care to clarify? Not really, Lauren said. I think most people here understand what I mean. Someone laughed softly. Another person shifted in their seat. I stood. Didn't rush it. Let the movement register. If you have a concern about my conduct, it should be addressed directly, I said, not framed as a hypothetical. She met my gaze, unflinching. Then answered directly. Do you believe personal background should factor into professional credibility? I believe competence speaks for itself. Even when appearances suggest otherwise, appearances often lie. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The moderator tried to intervene, but Lauren pressed on. There are standards in this industry. Some of us work hard to uphold them. And some of us mistake exclusivity for standards. That drew a sharper reaction. A few people nodded, others stiffened. The exchange ended there. Officially, at least. The panel moved on, but the damage didn't need more airtime. Afterward, conversations formed quickly, selectively. I caught fragments as people passed. Risk management issue. Not the image we want. Unfortunate, really. I didn't chase any of them. Grabbed a water, leaned against a table, waited for the room to settle. My phone buzzed. Can you step outside? A message read. It was from my supervisor. We stood near the exit, close enough to hear the hum of voices inside without being part of them. This is getting complicated, he said. Perception matters. Facts matter more. In theory. He avoided my eyes. We're going to need to reassign a few responsibilities, temporarily. Which ones? The public-facing ones, client relations, the advisory role. That's most of my job. Not permanently. I nodded, asked no follow-up questions. There was no appeal to make in that moment. Back inside, Lauren laughed with a group near the bar. Someone clinked a glass. The event rolled on, lighter now that the tension had found a target and passed. I left before it ended. Outside, I checked my email while walking. A formal notice had already been sent, language neutral, decisions framed as precautionary. At home, I loosened my tie and set it on the counter. My daughter's backpack rested by the door. A permission slip stuck out of the front pocket. I poured a glass of water, took a sip, then another. The phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Sitting at the table, I opened my laptop and added a few more files to the folder I'd started days earlier. Dates, names, exact wording from the panel transcript already circulating online. The loss was real. Title, influence, access, all gone with a smile and a microphone. I closed the computer and reached for the permission slip, signed my name at the bottom, and slid it back into the backpack before setting my alarm for the morning. The message arrived just after midnight, from an address made of numbers and nothing else. If you want to understand why they're so comfortable humiliating your father, look at the Port Authority contracts from 2003 to 2007, especially the ones that didn't make the press. No greeting, no signature. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, then forwarded it to the private folder I'd been building. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Around 3, I got up and pulled a box from the closet, the one I'd avoided since the divorce. Old hard drives, paper backups, things I'd promised myself I wouldn't need again. The contracts weren't hard to find once I knew where to look. They carried my father's fingerprints all over them, even if his name appeared only in footnotes and secondary filings. He'd stepped in when a logistics firm was on the edge of collapse, kept it running quietly, then walked away once it stabilized. No interviews, no press, no appetite for recognition. Lauren's firm had entered the picture years later, inheriting a system that worked because someone else had taken the risk first. That explained the confidence, the dismissal, the laughter. In the morning, my phone lit up with notifications I hadn't asked for. An opinion piece questioning my judgment, a thread speculating about favoritism, comments stacked on top of each other, repeating the same assumptions with minor variations. The narrative had settled into place without my consent. I met her that afternoon at a cafe near the courthouse. She arrived early, notebook closed, phone tucked away. "You're being isolated on purpose," she said after I filled her in. "This isn't gossip anymore. It's strategy. They're careful. They always are. That's how they stay clean." I slid the printed contracts across the table. "This is why they won't say his name out loud." She scanned the pages, eyes narrowing slightly. "You have leverage. Not the kind I want. Leverage doesn't care what you want, only what you do with it." I leaned back, rubbing my thumb along the edge of the cup. If I push, I lose what little access I have left. If you don't, you lose something else. She didn't need to spell it out. That loss had already started. There's a lawful way to handle this, she continued. Disclosure, documentation. You don't accuse. You present facts and let institutions respond. And my job? Might not survive it. I nodded. That much was obvious. But your name might, she added. We sat there while people came and went, the conversation drifting briefly to neutral ground before circling back. They're framing you as emotional, she said, as someone acting out of pride. They're not wrong about the pride. Pride isn't the same as dignity. On my way out, my phone buzzed again. A group chat I'd been removed from weeks earlier reappeared, now without my name attached to the earlier messages. Someone had edited history. Another reminder of who controlled the room. By evening, the pressure sharpened. A call from HR went unanswered. A former client canceled a meeting without explanation. A friend forwarded me a link with a single line. You might want to see this. I did. I saved it. I closed the browser. At home, dinner plates sat untouched longer than usual. My daughter talked about a science project, unaware of the shift unfolding beyond the kitchen. I listened, nodded, asked questions, then tucked her in when the time came. Once the apartment quieted, I spread the documents across the table. Dates lined up, names overlapped, patterns emerged where coincidence had been suggested. The anonymous email came back to me then, the plainness of it. Not a threat, not encouragement, just information. I opened my laptop and drafted a message to a legal contact I'd avoided calling for years. The cursor blinked while I adjusted the wording, stripped emotion from each sentence, attached files one by one. Before sending, I hesitated. Safety had always been my first calculation. Keep the kids steady, keep work intact, keep conflict minimal. That logic no longer fit the shape of what was happening. I clicked send, closed the laptop, and stood to clear the table, stacking the plates and carrying them to the sink, letting the water run as I rinsed them one at a time. The days took on a narrower shape after that. Fewer conversations, fewer explanations. I moved through routines without announcing myself, doing what needed to be done and nothing extra. Mornings started earlier. While the apartment stayed quiet, I reviewed documents at the kitchen table, marking timelines, cross-checking names, noting who signed what and when. Coffee went cold more than once. I didn't notice until my daughter wandered in, hair uncombed, asking if the milk was still good. Work became mechanical. Tasks arrived stripped of context. I completed them, logged the time, sent them back. No commentary, no opinions offered. That seemed to irritate some people more than resistance would have. Between calls, I took walks instead of sitting through lunch. Not to clear my head, to listen. The city talks if you stop trying to fill the space. Snippets of conversation floated by. A name mentioned here, a rumor there. Nothing I could use yet, but patterns don't announce themselves all at once. Evenings were for organizing. Files lived in multiple places now, backed up redundantly. I stopped trusting a single device. Screenshots were labeled with dates and sources. Emails stayed untouched, preserved exactly as received. It wasn't paranoia, just discipline. One night, a calendar invite disappeared an hour before it was supposed to happen. No notice, no apology. I wrote it down anyway. Another afternoon, a car idled outside my building longer than usual. Same vehicle showed up 2 days later near my office. Could have been coincidence. I treated it like information instead. A text came from a number I didn't recognize. You're making people nervous. I didn't respond. Saved it. Took a photo of the number. Moved on. The legal contact replied with a brief acknowledgement. Received. Reviewing. No promises. No reassurance. That was fine. I didn't need encouragement, only accuracy. At home, I stayed present in the ways that mattered. Homework checked. Dinner cooked. Laundry folded. The normalcy anchored me. It reminded me why I was being careful instead of loud. My father called one evening, asked if I wanted to come by on the weekend. I found some old notebooks, he said. Thought you might want to see them. I'll stop by. Everything okay? Yeah. He paused, then changed the subject. Talked about a neighbor who'd planted tomatoes too early in the season. I listened, let him finish. The notebooks turned out to be ledgers, handwritten, dates going back decades, routes, costs, margins, decisions made quietly to keep other people afloat. I photographed each page, thanked him, didn't explain why. Back in my car, I sat for a minute before starting the engine. The information was heavier now, not emotionally, structurally. It connected too many dots to ignore. Pressure increased in subtle ways. A friend declined an invitation they'd already accepted. A professional contact stopped returning messages altogether. An article appeared praising new leadership in spaces I'd been removed from, framed as progress. Late one night, my laptop froze mid-upload. When it restarted, a folder was missing. Not deleted, just inaccessible. I switched networks, logged into a backup account, confirmed the files were safe elsewhere. Still, the message was clear. Someone was paying attention. Sleep shortened but deepened. When I closed my eyes, there was no replaying conversations, no imagined confrontations, just lists, steps, order. I stopped talking to people who didn't need to know what I was doing. Even with her, I limited updates. Not out of mistrust, out of respect for the process. A voicemail came in while I was washing dishes. "We're hearing things," a familiar voice said. "You might want to slow down." I let the sink run, rinsed the last plate, set it in the rack. The phone stayed where it was. Later, as I packed lunches for the next day, I noticed my hands were steady. No rush, no shaking, just movement. Whatever was forming beneath the surface didn't need my commentary. It needed time. The envelope waited on the kitchen counter when I got home. Plain, thick. No return address that meant anything to me. My daughter was in her room, door half closed, music low enough to pretend she wasn't listening to the world yet. Inside were 2 letters, one from my employer's legal department, formal language, temporary suspension pending review, access revoked, badge deactivated by morning. The other came from a firm I didn't recognize at first. Then I did. Lauren's firm. Cease and desist. Claims of reputational harm. Warnings about further action if I continued spreading misleading narratives. I set both letters down without rereading them. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. The phone rang before I could move. "Dad," my sister said, "why am I hearing that lawyers are calling around asking about you?" "Because they ran out of quiet options. You're scaring people." "I know." She exhaled sharply. "Mom's upset. She thinks you're dragging everyone into something unnecessary." She thought that the last time, too. Silence stretched between us. Not hostile, just tired. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not really." "Then stop. If I stop now, it won't stop for me." She didn't answer. The line went dead a second later. I sat down and opened my laptop out of habit, then closed it again. Nothing new would come from staring at screens tonight. Instead, I walked into my daughter's room. She paused her music when she saw my face. "Everything all right?" "Yeah, I just wanted to check in." She studied me for a moment, then nodded and went back to what she was doing. Kids sense shifts even when they don't name them. Back in the kitchen, another message came through, this one shorter. "We can make this go away." No greeting, no signature. I recognized the phrasing. I didn't reply. An hour later, a different number lit up my phone. "You're being reckless," a voice said when I answered. "You're risking your career over pride." "This isn't about pride." "Then what is it?" "Limits." A scoff came through the line. "You're not in a position to set those." "Watch me." The call ended without ceremony. Later that night, I drove to my father's place without calling ahead. He opened the door in slippers, surprise flickering briefly across his face before settling into concern. "Is something wrong? Do you still have those notebooks?" "Of course." He moved to the living room, reached under a side table, and pulled one out. I took it from him, flipped a few pages, then closed it again. "They're coming after me now," I said. "For what?" "For not staying small." He sat down heavily. "I never meant for any of this to touch you. It already has, years ago." He rubbed his hands together, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "I thought if I kept my head down, it would protect you." I thought the same thing. Neither of us spoke for a while. The clock ticked. A car passed outside. "What are you going to do?" he asked finally. "I'm done pretending this is misunderstanding." He nodded once. No argument, no guilt. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. An alert from the legal contact. A meeting request. Tomorrow morning. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired, yes. Cornered, maybe. But still there. When I pulled into my building's garage, the space next to mine was empty. It usually wasn't. I noted that too. Upstairs, I laid the letters side by side on the table, slid them into a folder, and added today's date to the front. The kids' lunches still needed packing. Morning routines didn't pause for anyone's legal threats. As I sealed the last bag and set it in the fridge, my phone vibrated once more. This doesn't end well for you. I turned the phone face down and reached for a pen, writing a short list on the back of an old envelope before the ink had time to dry. The meeting took place in a building I'd passed 100 times without noticing. No signage worth remembering. Neutral furniture. A conference room that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The man across from me didn't bother with pleasantries. "Someone is lying," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "And they've been careful about how." Inside were affidavits, shipping records, an internal memo that never reached public filing, dates circled in pen, names redacted in places, highlighted in others. "This came from a former partner of theirs," he continued. "Quiet exit, generous severance. He kept copies." I flipped through slowly. The structure was familiar now. Money moving sideways, credit assigned upward, risk pushed down until it disappeared. "They've denied everything," I said. "Of course they have. On the surface, they're clean. But underneath? Underneath, they rely on one assumption, which is that no one will take the time to line things up." I closed the folder and set it aside. On the walk home, my phone buzzed with an alert. A new article, same talking points, same quotes. Lauren's name appeared twice, calm, confident, dismissive. At home, I laid everything out across the table. Old notebooks, contracts, emails, screenshots. The affidavit sat in the center, heavier than the rest. I didn't rush. That was the mistake they expected. Instead, I mapped the relationships. Who answered to whom? Who signed off without authority? Who benefited when someone else took the blame? Patterns emerged where chaos had been suggested. The weakness wasn't money or influence. It was sequence. Their version of events only worked if no one checked the order. A knock came at the door, unexpected. I paused, then opened it. She stood there, jacket still on, eyes alert. "They're pushing harder today," she said as she stepped inside. "Calls, background checks. They're trying to find something on you." "They won't." "That's not the point. They're nervous." I handed her the affidavit. She skimmed, eyebrows lifting slightly. "This changes things. It confirms them." "Have you sent it?" "Not yet." "Why wait?" "Because timing matters more than truth. Truth lasts. Timing lands." She considered that, then nodded. "They'll deny this too." "Publicly, yes." "Privately?" "Privately, they'll scramble." My phone rang again. This time, I answered. "You're making a mistake," Lauren said. "You don't understand how exposed you are." "I understand exactly where I stand." "Then stop before this gets ugly." "It already is, just not for me." "You think a few papers will protect you?" "I think they'll protect the record." A sharp exhale on the other end. "You're forcing our hand. You've been holding it on the table the whole time." The line went dead. She looked at me. That sounded final. "I know." The rest of the afternoon passed in focused quiet. I drafted statements, not accusations, timelines, attached exhibits, references to statutes that didn't care about intent, only sequence and disclosure. Dinner came and went. My daughter ate at the counter, talked about a presentation she was nervous about. I listened, helped her rehearse, corrected a line gently. Life continued at its own pace. Later, after she went to bed, I sent the packets. One to the regulator, one to the oversight board, one to a journalist known for patience rather than speed. I didn't send anything to Lauren. When the last email left my outbox, there was no rush of relief, just a sense of alignment, like something finally sat where it belonged. I gathered the remaining papers, slid them back into their folders, and stacked them neatly by the door. Tomorrow would bring noise, questions, pushback. For now, I turned off the kitchen light, checked the lock, and moved down the hallway, already thinking through what would need to happen next. The room filled faster than I expected. Lawyers, board members, a few faces I recognized from earlier panels, now quieter, less certain. No one greeted me when I took my seat. That was fine. This wasn't a social gathering. Lauren arrived last. She didn't look at me at first. Papers in hand, confident posture, the kind that assumes gravity will cooperate. The chair called the meeting to order. Formalities moved quickly. When Lauren spoke, she didn't hesitate. "We're here because false claims have been circulating," she said. "Claims designed to damage reputations and disrupt ongoing operations." She looked at me then, steady and practiced. "We deny them entirely." A murmur followed. Someone cleared their throat. A pen clicked. I waited. Her counsel leaned forward. "Mr. Harris, you've made serious allegations. We'd like to know on what basis." "I didn't make allegations," I said. "I submitted records." "Records can be misinterpreted." "Not when they're complete." Lauren smiled slightly. "You're emotional about this," she said. "Anyone would be. Family complicates objectivity. So does profit." That drew a reaction. Not loud, just enough. She shifted tactics. "Your access was already under review before this. Performance issues, boundary concerns. Then the timing is convenient. Or overdue." I opened the folder in front of me and slid a document across the table. "Port Authority contract amendments from 2004, I said, "signed by an entity that didn't yet exist on paper." Her counsel frowned, glanced at it, then looked back up. "That's a clerical error." Then explain the transfer that followed 3 weeks later. Another document moved forward, then another. The chair leaned in. "Ms. Reynolds, did your firm control these assets at that time?" Lauren didn't answer immediately. "Our position is that any transition was lawful. The sequence wasn't," I said, "and sequence matters." She leaned back, crossed her arms. "You're cherry-picking." "I'm lining things up." The counsel tried again. "Even if there were irregularities, they don't involve you directly. They involve my father. He's not on the agenda. He's in the paperwork." I placed the affidavits on the table. Originals, not copies. The weight of them changed the air. Former partners, internal memos, severance agreements tied to silence. Lauren's smile faltered. "This is coercion. It's disclosure." She turned to the chair. "This is an ambush. It's a response." The chair raised a hand. "Ms. Reynolds, we'll need time to review these materials." Her voice sharpened. "You can't seriously—" "We can," the chair said, "and we will." Her counsel whispered something to her. She shook her head. "You think this ends here?" she said to me. "You've burned every bridge you had." I stopped walking on ones that were on fire. She stood abruptly. "This won't stand. Neither will false filings." Silence followed. Not dramatic, administrative. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. People gathered their things. Conversations started in low tones. "Careful now." Lauren brushed past me on her way out. "You could have handled this quietly." "I tried." "You didn't try hard enough." "I tried for years." She stopped, turned. "You'll regret this." I already regretted the alternative. She left without another word. I stayed long enough to confirm next steps. Document requests, timelines. Nothing emotional, just process. Outside, the afternoon continued like any other. Traffic, footsteps, a vendor arguing over change. I checked my phone. Messages waited, missed calls. I didn't open them yet. At home, I set my keys down and loosened my collar. The kitchen looked the same as it had that morning. Lunch containers stacked by the sink. A note from my daughter reminding me about her presentation tomorrow. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. The folder went onto the shelf with the others, now complete. Later, I texted my father. "It's moving forward," he replied a minute later. "Proud of you." I placed the phone face down and started reheating leftovers, listening to the quiet return to its place. The paperwork arrived in pieces. An email here, a certified letter there. Nothing dramatic, just confirmations that processes had started moving without my involvement. Lauren's name appeared less often as the days passed. First removed from a committee, then listed as on leave, later absent entirely. No announcement followed. Institutions rarely explain themselves when they don't have to. My employer finalized my separation with language that tried to sound mutual. I signed it without edits. The title I'd lost didn't feel like a loss anymore. Titles had been doing more to keep me quiet than to keep me safe. A reporter left a voicemail asking for comment. I didn't return it. Another sent questions by email. I archived them. The record spoke well enough on its own. One afternoon, my sister called again. Her tone was different this time. Less defensive. Slower. "They're saying things might get ugly for her," she said. "That happens when facts stop cooperating. Mom thinks you went too far." Mom thought that when I asked for boundaries, too. She sighed. "So that's it?" "That's it." We didn't argue. There was nothing left to negotiate. I met my father for lunch at a small place he liked. Same booth, same order. He read the menu even though he knew it by heart. "People have been calling," he said, "asking questions. You don't owe them answers." "Good," he said. "I'm tired of explaining myself." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then he looked up. "I should have corrected them years ago. You did what you knew how to do, and you paid for it. I paid for staying quiet too long." He nodded, accepting that. The following week, my daughter gave her presentation. She stumbled over the first sentence, recovered, then finished strong. I clapped louder than necessary. She smiled, relief flashing across her face before she caught herself. On the way home, she asked why I'd been around more lately. "Work changed," I said. "Is that bad?" "No, just different." She seemed satisfied with that and turned her attention back to her phone. At night, the apartment felt larger, not emptier, just less crowded by things that didn't belong there anymore. I boxed up old work materials and dropped them off without ceremony. Deleted contacts I hadn't spoken to in years. Unsubscribed from newsletters that assumed I was still chasing approval. The legal contact sent a final update. Findings substantiated, further action pending. I read it once and closed the laptop. A message came in from a number I recognized but hadn't saved. "You didn't have to destroy everything." I stared at it for a moment, then deleted the thread without replying. That was the last I heard from her. On a quiet Saturday morning, I took my daughter to the park. We walked the long way, talked about nothing important. I sat on a bench while she played, answering emails I cared about and ignoring the rest. Later, I stopped by my father's place to return the notebooks. He waved it off. "Keep them," he said. "They're part of your story now. They're yours. Not anymore." I tucked them under my arm and headed for the door. Driving home, traffic slowed near the river. I waited, watched the light change, didn't feel the urge to rush it. When I pulled into my building's garage, the familiar spot was still empty. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there a moment longer than necessary. Upstairs, I set the notebooks on a shelf, washed my hands, and started dinner. The phone stayed silent on the counter. Nothing needed defending. Nothing needed explaining. For the first time in a long while, that felt like enough.